Chapter 20-21.
Midori Peofao.
Gol D. Xebec. Although this person appears to possess remarkable strength and conqueror's haki, I am not familiar with him. It is intriguing that someone with such remarkable abilities seems to be relatively unknown. Furthermore, I have not come across any other identities or aliases that he may be utilizing, as this is the first time I have laid eyes on his face.
Boom.
His movements are getting faster too. Unbelievable. I don't actually know if he's using a similar technique as Soru, but he can definitely match my speed. Furthermore, his devil fruit is troubling me. I still couldn't figure out precisely how it works, except that everything that makes any contact with it will be completely erased. Is it perhaps something akin to decay? Does the object that has been in touch begin to age to the point of no longer existing? That might possibly work. As they both paused and made eye contact, Midori wore a pensive look while Xebec sported a wide grin, seemingly relishing the confrontation. Once more, Xebec's sword, its edge sheathed in both armament haki and a dense aura of darkness, descended upon Midori with deadly intent. With a whooshing sound, a colossal slash spanning a distance of 50 meters surged toward Midori, threatening to cleave him in two. Before, Midori had evaded confrontations and skillfully dodged attacks imbued with the power of Xebec's devil fruit. But this time he stood his ground, determined not to dodge anymore. With a swift movement, he channeled his armament haki into his sword, causing it to glow with a dazzling shimmer. At the same time, he unleashed a sword projectile toward Xebec, which sliced through the air with deadly precision. In a clash of slashes, the previous encounters had always been dominated by Xebec's attacks, which were fueled by his devil fruit powers. However, this time was different. As the two attacks collided, they clashed against each other with great force. The impact was so immense that an explosion erupted, as the attacks neutralized each other, creating a dazzling display of energy. Following the explosion, Midori's voice chimed in, breaking the momentary silence. "So that's how it is." Midori spoke up, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and understanding. "Your devil fruit has the power to age anything until it ceases to exist. However, it can be countered with armament haki internal destruction." His words were calculated and precise, as if he had figured out a crucial piece of the puzzle. "And it took you that long to figure it out?" Xebec replied, a wide grin spreading across his face. He seemed to be amused by Midori's revelation, as if he had known this all along. In response, Midori's expression turned somewhat grim, but it did not deter him from his next move. With a determined look in his eyes, he propelled himself forward with a burst of momentum, hurtling toward Xebec with incredible speed and force. It was clear that he was not going to let his taunts get the best of him. Likewise, Xebec charged forward at breakneck speed in the direction of Midori. As they closed in on each other, Xebec and Midori exchanged sword slashes once again. This time, both combatants had coated their swords in armament haki, making their attacks even more formidable. However, just like before, their blades did not make any physical contact. But this time, something was different. Both Xebec and Midori had also infused their attacks with internal destruction, amplifying the destructive power of their strikes. The result was a dazzling display of energy as their swords clashed, sending shockwaves rippling through the air. TZZZZTZZ. Despite the fact that their swords were not physically connecting, Xebec and Midori remained in close proximity to each other, each struggling for dominance. The two combatants were like two wild animals, locked in a fierce battle for supremacy. As the battle between Xebec and Midori raged on, the ground in their immediate surroundings began to dissolve entirely. The sheer power of their attacks was causing the earth beneath them to crumble and disintegrate. A tempest burst forth from the epicenter of the battle, sending shockwaves rippling out in all directions. "You're really powerful. I'll give you that. TZZ, though I hate to admit it, you too." Midori spoke, his voice slightly strained as he caught his breath. Despite his fatigue, however, he remained focused and determined to keep fighting. Boom! As the battle between Xebec and Midori continued, a gigantic detonation erupted, surpassing any of the previous explosions. The sheer force of the blast sent shockwaves rippling out in all directions, and a massive crater measuring almost 70 meters in width was formed on the surface below. As the smoke and dust began to clear, both Xebec and Midori emerged from the blast, landing on opposite sides. Xebec landed on one side, while Midori landed on the other. Without any hesitation, they immediately accelerated at an incredibly fast pace once again. As they closed the distance to just a few meters between them, a voice resonated through the air. "XAHHA, I have to admit, it was really enjoyable, but I think that's enough for now," said Xebec, who was barely a meter or two away from Midori. As before, the two swords were infused with advanced armament haki. Midori wondered what exactly Xebec had intended to achieve with his implication. He no longer had any advantage with his devil fruit encasement, as he could cancel it out with internal destruction. However, Midori didn't have time to ponder over it either. Just moments before their collision, Midori noticed that Xebec's eyes had taken on a crimson hue. This time, his charge was not just coated with armament hockey. No, scarlet red lightning also encircled his sword. With too little time to evade, all Midori could do was confront the oncoming attack. The last thing Midori perceived was that Xebec had been whispering some words. Heavenly descent. Boom. Despite utilizing both emission and internal destruction, Midori couldn't do anything against Xebec's attack. Xebec's strike immediately dominated and Midori was blasted away like a missile. He soared at tremendous speed, hurtling hundreds of meters away into the distance. He smashed through one tree after another, and one boulder at a time, until eventually crashing into one of the mountains, leaving a massive imprint that trapped Midori inside. Pride, who was observing from afar, was extremely amazed. It reminded him of a scene from the manga where Kaido, using Conqueror's Haki, had similarly catapulted Luffy hundreds of meters away to a distant place. However, from his observations, he could conclude one thing. Xebec was currently stronger than Roger, that's for sure. Pride recalled that just before Roger used Conqueror's Haki, he had mentioned that it was a technique he had newly learned. In contrast, Xebec used Conqueror's Haki like armament hockey, and the process was just as smooth. TRK.
Asterisk boom asterisk.
Midori emerged from the debris. He tried with all his might to fend off Xebec's advance, but his efforts were in vain. Although he managed to avoid the full impact, he still received his fair share of the attack. Midori's garments were in tatters, with his navy coat and black shirt completely shredded as he struggled to defend himself. His upper body was exposed, dripping with his blood where his shirt used to be. The portion of the impact that he had been subjected to caused his body to suffer from many cuts. Tick, tick. The area where Midori was currently located, several hundred meters away, appeared to be dead silent. Upon closer listening, one could hear the sound of his blood pounding on the ground. Unfortunately, Midori had no time to rest, as he saw another slash with red lightning encircling it, measuring about 70 meters in length, approaching him. Midori didn't hesitate any further and mustered all of his power reserves before bursting off at maximum speed to avoid the incoming slash.
Asterisk boom asterisk.
As Midori evaded the slash, a loud echo reverberated, audible throughout the entire surroundings. As Midori turned around, all he was able to witness was the mountain, which had previously been several kilometers in height, sliced in half by the slash that he had just evaded. The remaining kilometers of crumbling rocks that crashed to the bottom generated an enormous impact, shaking the surrounding area and sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. After the impact had subsided, Midori whispered to himself in amazement. He's truly unbelievably strong. I can count on one hand the individuals who have achieved a level of strength similar to his. Not only can he use Conqueror's coding, but his mastery of swordsmanship even surpasses mine, and I'm already a grandmaster. It's truly incredible. Indeed, even a partial hit from an attack coated with Conqueror's Haki can be devastating, and Midori was no exception. He was hurt badly, with numerous cuts and wounds covering his body. The fact that only a select few are capable of utilizing the Conqueror's coding technique is a testament to its incredible power and difficulty to master.
Asterisk boom asterisk.
Midori could only perceive that Xebec was approaching at an incredible speed. That's it. I'll give it my all now. It's do or die, yelled the Admiral. Midori summoned all the Haki he had left to launch a final powerful attack. TRK. Midori's sword, now black and encased with his armament Haki, was surrounded by a green aura that enveloped both him and his weapon. ARJ. Take that, Doragon Sarashu. Boom. The phantom of a greenish dragon, measuring about 40 meters in width and 60 meters in height, burst forth from Midori's sword. As the dragon approached Xebec, he too charged toward it with his sword raised high. The clash between the two was imminent. Xebec, who this time managed to sense the threat of the assault through his observations Haki, did not underestimate it in the slightest. He immediately halted his advance and fixed his gaze on the approaching dragon. With his right hand, he tightly grasped his sword, ready to face the incoming attack. The dragon was rapidly closing in on Xebec, and was only about 30 meters away from him. Xebec's eyes once again acquired a crimson hue. Heavenly descent.
Asterisk boom asterisk.
Again he swung a slash that was encased in Conqueror's Haki. A massive dragon clashed with a long black slash encased in scarlet lightning.
Asterisk boom asterisk.
While Xebec had poured a lot of his power into the attack, Midori had given everything he had at his disposal. A massive explosion tore through the area, leaving hundreds of meters of scenery utterly devastated. All that remained were vast craters visible on the ground. A massive column of smoke rose into the sky, spreading out over hundreds of meters and obscuring the view of the surrounding landscape. After a few minutes, the smoke dissipated completely. Step. Xebec, that stepped out of the detonation, slowly approached Midori. Xebec, I must admit, you are truly formidable, Xebec spoke, his hand gently touching his stomach as he addressed Midori. A long sword cut stretched from Xebec's abdomen to his chest, spanning approximately 20 centimeters. Blood oozed from the wound as Xebec touched it with his hand. In a surprising turn of events, Midori's charge not only nullified Xebec's attack, but it also managed to inflict a wound on him, albeit a non-threatening one. Xebec was taken aback by the unexpected outcome. Despite putting all his might into the previous attack, Midori had almost no strength left to spare. The exertion had taken a toll on him, and on top of his injury, he now found himself lacking the necessary power to continue the fight. Midori leaned on the sword he held in his right hand, using it as a support as he tried to catch his breath. Xebec continued to approach him, closing the distance between them until he was standing right in front of Midori. Cough. Gol D, Xebec, I imagine that in the years to come, your name will be known far and wide. Midori spoke, his voice strained as he wiped the blood from his mouth with his spare hand. Despite his injuries and fatigue, he spoke with a sense of admiration and respect for his opponent. Xebec, you can be sure of that, Xebec chuckled in response to Midori's words. By the way, what's your name? He asked, his curiosity piqued. Despite their brief encounter, Xebec had taken notice of Midori's strength and tenacity and was interested in learning more about him. Midori grinned in response, his face blood-stained from the injuries he had sustained. It was a grim expression, but one that conveyed a sense of satisfaction and pride in his performance in the fight. Midori is my name. Xebec Midori, I must admit, I was quite impressed by your final attack. Xebec spoke, as he drew the sword he had previously sheathed. Standing just a couple of meters in front of Midori, Xebec made a motion with his hand, drawing a sword slash that spanned from the right side to the left, with an overall length of only 5 meters. The attack descended toward Midori with lightning speed, leaving him little time to react. Midori, who had exhausted his strength and was unable to protect himself with armament haki, was subjected to the full force of Xebec's sword slash. The attack landed on him, and he was unable to avoid it or mitigate its impact in any way. But, unlike their previous clash, there was no explosion this time. Instead, the only sound that echoed through the air was the impact of a figure hitting the ground. Midori had fallen, his strength depleted and his injuries too severe to continue the fight. The battle was over, and Xebec emerged as the victor. Midori had lost consciousness and was lying on the ground, his body battered and broken from the intense battle. He had suffered a long cut on his upper body, and his blood was slowly pouring out of the wound, staining the ground beneath him. Xebec, gradually moving away from the scene, began to laugh. His high-pitched voice rang out, echoing through the air as he reveled in his victory over Midori. The sound was almost maniacal, filled with an intense sense of joy and power. Despite the gravity of the situation and the injuries that Midori had sustained, Xebec showed no remorse or pity, only a sense of pride and domination.
Xash, Midori.
Fate shall decide whether you live or die, though I'm sure you'll survive. Until the next time, Xebec, Xebec laughingly said, as he continued to move away from the scene of the battle. His voice was filled with a sense of arrogance and superiority. Pride, who had been observing the battle from afar, was quite shocked by the last attack from both fighters. The strength that both Midori and Xebec displayed was tremendous, and it was clear that they were both incredibly powerful. Subsequently, Pride also moved out of sight, relieved that Xebec paid no further attention to him. Pride's mind was in turmoil as he reflected on his recent encounters with the likes of Roger and Xebec. Despite his ability to discern that Roger was a good person, he couldn't shake the realization that his lack of strength made him vulnerable to the powerful figures that roamed the seas. He had always assumed that the strongest individuals were confined to the Grand Line, but his encounters proved otherwise. If he hadn't had his knowledge of the One Piece plot, he might have inadvertently made enemies of these powerful figures and met an early demise. The thought sent shivers down his spine. I need to take some time to train and improve my strength before continuing my journey. Only when I feel confident in my ability to protect myself will I set out again, Pride said to himself as he ventured deeper into the forest, determined to become stronger. 2 years have elapsed since the clash between Gol D, Xebec, and Admiral Midori. Since that time, numerous events have taken place on the seas. Indeed, during this time period, several notable characters were born who would go on to have a significant impact on the world. One such character is Kazan, who would become one of the future admirals. Additionally, there were several children born to Big Mom, one of the Yonko, who would also go on to become important figures in their own right. Another event that took place in that period pleased Pride quite a bit. Specifically, that Brook was now reborn as a skeleton. Shortly after his defeat, Midori was discovered by a rear admiral in a severely wounded state. However, his injuries were able to be temporarily treated on the scene. When the other Marine soldiers awakened from their unconscious state, they quickly made their way back to Marineford. Although they could have stopped at another base, they were confident in the exceptional medical care available at Marineford. The journey to Marineford took approximately 1 week, during which time the admiral remained unconscious due to the significant amount of blood he had lost. For him, the journey was a struggle to survive. Despite the difficult journey, the admiral managed to overcome the obstacle and eventually disembarked at Marineford. Upon arrival, he received the best medical treatment and remained under surveillance. Upon the rear admiral's report, a conference of the highest authorities was immediately convened to discuss the threat that Xebec had posed. After thorough deliberation, a bounty was issued in response to Xebec's actions. Dead or alive rocks D. Xebec 1.800.000.000. Several individuals for directions. Once he obtained the necessary information, he wasted no time and headed towards the forest. Det situated between Mt. Kalubo and Gray Terminal. A large expanse of forest was visible. Why, despite almost 2 years have passed since the bounty was issued, there has been no trace of the person in question. It is as if he has disappeared into thin air, only waiting for the right moment to reappear. Amidst this period, the seas were turbulent with clashes between major crews erupting frequently in the New World. One notable clash occurred between the Akuma pirates and the Sphinx pirates, with both captains holding bounties of over 1 billion. The battle, which caused significant destruction to the surrounding area, was closely monitored by Marine Admiral Kong. However, despite the intense fighting, neither side seemed to gain the upper hand, and after several hours, they eventually decided to withdraw. In addition to the clashes between the Akuma pirates and Sphinx pirates, a new pirate crew called the Cold Pirates wreaked havoc in the New World. Led by their captain, Draco, the Cold Pirates had been active in the region for over a year and had gained notoriety for their ruthless tactics. Draco's reputation was further cemented when he was able to successfully take down 2 rear admirals and fight on equal footing with a vice admiral, resulting in a new bounty being placed on his head. Dead or alive Draco 800.000.000. During this tumultuous period, the Roger Pirates clashed with the Marines in several more instances, including a noteworthy battle against an admiral and his fleet. Despite being up against the formidable Marines, the Roger Pirates managed to hold their own, and neither side emerged as a clear winner. Once again, the Roger Pirates escaped capture, and as a result of their exploits, the bounties on each crew member were raised, with several individuals receiving exceptionally high bounties. Dead or alive Gol D. Roger 1.700.000.000. Dead or alive Silvers Rayleigh 1.200.000.000. Dead or alive Scopper Gaban 850.000.000. Another individual who was causing havoc across the seas was Edward Newgate, a bulky giant who traveled alone and had consumed the Gura Gura no Mi, one of the strongest devil fruits. He was able to defeat both pirates and Marine members, and as a result, his bounty was increased by a staggering 300 million during that time. Dead or alive Edward Newgate 1.000.000.000. The calendar year 1477. Dawn Island. Midway Forest is a forest located in the Goa Kingdom. The occasional sound of terrifying creatures lurking in the depths. As the morning sun rose above the horizon, it cast its warm light over all of Dawn Island, illuminating the lush greenery and sparkling ocean. The air was filled with the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers and the sound of birdsong as they flitted about in the sky. Step, step. A young man emerged from the forest clearing and stepped into an open field. He was dragging a large beast behind him, which he intended to roast. The young man had medium-length black hair and piercing blue eyes that stood out against his slightly tanned skin. He was also quite tall, standing at an impressive height of 1.98 m, and had a well-toned physique that indicated his physical training. Finally, my training is completed. After witnessing the intense battle between Xebec and the Admiral years ago, Pride quickly left the area when Xebec showed no attention to him. Recognizing his own weakness and inability to protect himself, Pride remained on the island of Kozia for a few more days until a ship was ready to set sail. The ship's destination was Dawn Island, and Pride decided to join the ship and continue his journey. The island on which Fusha village, Garp's home, is situated. Pride struggled to recall all the locations in the East Blue that could provide a good training area. As he had not yet mastered flying, it was not feasible for him to travel to another Blue Sea via the reverse mountain. Previously, the only way to achieve this was by having Roger utilize his armament hockey to protect the entire ship and prevent any potential damage from impacts. While Pride may have been able to attempt it with a smaller vessel, he chose not to take the risk as he was a devil fruit user. Nonetheless, Pride's memory served him well as he remembered scenes from One Piece set in the Goa Kingdom, which depicted Dawn Island as having an expansive forest teeming with wildlife. Therefore, he was content with the ship's course towards the island, as it would save him the trouble of having to sail to Dawn Island from another location all over again. The journey to Dawn Island was relatively short, and after a few days, Pride arrived on the island's shore. Without hesitation, he immediately set out to find the way to Midway Forest and approached Ermund not to delay his valuable training any further. During his time on Dawn Island, Pride had been devoting all of his time to training within the confines of Midway Forest. He stumbled upon a cave, which he then equipped with a blanket and pillow, making it his makeshift home during his stay on the island. He spent his days devoted to improving his skills, taking breaks only for necessary bodily functions such as sleeping and eating. Pride would often rise early in the morning and begin his day with breakfast. His morning meal consisted of either freshly picked fruits or grilled meat, both of which he would procure from the surrounding forest. After breakfast, Pride would engage in a rigorous training routine that began with a 10-kilometer run, during which he would drag a massive boulder along with him. Once he completed his run, he would proceed to do push-ups and sit-ups, without a specific set of repetitions. He pushed himself until his body ached and he could no longer continue. Following his rigorous workout, Pride would take a 2-hour break, during which he would eat another meal. After resting, he would commence his swordsmanship training. He would swing his sword in every conceivable angle, using every feasible combination he could imagine. Since he had already ingrained the basics taught to him by his grandfather as muscle memory, he focused on refining his movements, continuing to practice until his arms felt as though they were about to detach from his body. After completing his swordsmanship training, Pride would take another break before continuing with his devil fruit training. He would start by refining all the abilities he had already learned, practicing until he could execute them with near perfection. Pride intended to be capable of using his abilities instantaneously and smoothly, without any complications that could arise from a lack of control over them. Once he had completed all the exercises, he would resume practicing levitation using his gravitational power. Though he often fell at first, his aim was to perfect the technique so that he could execute it flawlessly, much like Shiki did with his devil fruit. In addition to levitation, Pride also worked to master another technique that involved controlling objects in his environment using his gravitational force. He practiced launching rocks and fragments of mountains at his opponents using sword slashes, controlling their trajectory to ensure they hit their targets with deadly force. Although his technique was not as advanced as Fujitora's ability to pull down meteors from the stratosphere, Pride's method was still powerful and effective, allowing him to control and catapult large, heavy objects onto his opponents with deadly accuracy. Mastering the technique of controlling objects using his gravitational force required an immense amount of focus and dedication from Pride. He continued to train tirelessly until he had some degree of success in executing the technique. However, his ultimate objective was to control the boulders in such a way that he wouldn't have to pay any attention to them to move them around. He aimed to be able to move objects with such ease that it would become second nature to him, allowing him to focus on other aspects of his fighting style during battles. After completing his devil fruit training, Pride would take another period of rest before starting his haki practice. To refine his control over his conqueror's haki, Pride used it against the fierce beasts that roamed throughout the forest. He would attract several beasts simultaneously and allow them to attack him, spending hours on end honing his observations haki. His goal was to avoid attacks by just a few millimeters, using his timing and reflexes to evade their attacks with minimal movement. He believed that this kind of training would help him conserve stamina in battle by avoiding attacks with the slightest of movements. This could prove useful in a battle against someone of similar strength, as the one with the higher stamina would have an advantage. For his armament haki, Pride would coat his entire body with it and let the fierce beasts strike at him. He allowed them to smash him through the surrounding areas until he no longer had sufficient strength to maintain his haki. Covered in sweat, with aches and bruises all over his body, he withdrew to his dwelling to recuperate. He diligently trained every day for a continuous 2-year period without ever venturing beyond the boundaries of the Midway Forest. Due to his unwavering dedication, he made tremendous progress in all the skills he had been practicing. His swordsmanship, in particular, had advanced to the point where he had reached the threshold of the master stage. After much practice, he had also become proficient in using his devil fruit ability to fly through the air. Additionally, he had honed his skills to the point where he could manipulate objects with ease, almost effortlessly. With the help of his observations haki, he could perceive and identify objects that were within his control, without needing to focus his attention on them. Thanks to his unwavering commitment, he had made notable progress in his conqueror's haki. He had developed the ability to selectively target specific individuals without affecting those he did not wish to influence. As for his observations haki, he had expanded the range of it, allowing him to perceive a broader area. Moreover, he had become more skilled in deciphering the intentions of his targets, enabling him to anticipate their actions and respond accordingly. His armament haki had also progressed significantly. He had developed the ability to envelop objects with it in a more controlled manner, which had previously been challenging for him. Although he had attempted to do so in the past, his efforts had been short-lived, and sometimes they had not worked at all. Back to the present. Sitting beside a warm and crackling bonfire, Pride was enjoying his meal, which consisted of a roasted pig-like animal that he had captured earlier. Over the years, Pride had transformed into a different person, shaped by his relentless pursuit of self-improvement. Munch, munch. All the hard work and dedication have finally paid off, he muttered to himself, reflecting on the past 2 years that he had spent in seclusion within the Midway Forest. It was undoubtedly worth it, he continued, feeling proud of his accomplishments. Ding. Name, Pride. Age, 17 years old. The template, Shanks, extraction 52%. Abilities, advanced swordsman. In this stage, the swordsman is capable of cutting through objects that are thicker than the length of the sword, such as buildings or ships. Observations, hockey. Intermediate stage. Armament, hockey. Intermediate stage. Conqueror's hockey. Intermediate stage. Devil fruit. Zushi no Mi. Progress 49%. Abilities. Gravity suppression. Gravity alleviation. Gravity repulsion. Gravity attraction. Gravity slash similar to a flying slash. However, during the physical impact, the touched subject will be under the influence of gravitational forces with the result of being squeezed. Flight. Gravitational conjuration. Swallowing the last bite of his meal, Pride realized that it was time for him to embark on a new adventure. It's time for me to find my first mate, he said with determination, his voice slightly muffled due to the food still in his mouth.